Prophets versus Empires.
This podcast was originally recorded in Hebrew and features AI-generated English dubbing. The voices are not those of the original speaker.
Recap of Chapter 3, The Sin of the Spiritual Leadership. In the previous episode, we explored how the prophets directed their harshest criticism not at empires or political leaders, but at the spiritual leadership who failed in their sacred duty. We discovered that the temple in Jerusalem served as a connection point between heaven and earth, the place where cosmic energy flowed most abundantly. The priests were entrusted with transferring this power to the people, but when they turned to idol worship, they polluted the ethereal world with dark thought forms. We also learned that modern idolatry isn't just about statues, but anything we place at the highest position in our lives: money, status, relationships, or science. This explains why, throughout history, the corruption of the spiritual leadership has always preceded national disasters, as demonstrated by the fall of the First Temple. The lesson is clear. When those closest to the divine power misuse it, the common people have no chance at redemption.
Chapter 4. Empires as tools for fulfilling the law of karma, the law of cause and effect. And now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant. Jeremiah 27:6. Let me take you back in time to the final years of the First Temple period, to the reign of King Josiah, who ruled just 23 years before the First Temple's destruction in 586 BCE. If we can truly understand the message of the prophets from that era, we will see why no empire can ever stand above God's justice and His perfect laws of creation. This period was marked by wars between the major empires of that time, Egypt and Assyria, and later Babylon, all fighting for control over the land of Israel. This is similar to the wars between empires today, mainly the United States versus China, because for thousands of years, the land of Israel has always been a focal point for power struggles between empires, primarily for strategic reasons. The economic situation during that era was equally dire. Crushing taxes were barely paid to Assyria, international trade suffered greatly under Assyrian domination, and the population endured severe economic hardship and widespread poverty. Does this sound familiar to our current situation? Truly, there is nothing new under the sun. History simply repeats itself, though now with far greater intensity due to the days of the final judgment. Following the failed rebellion of King Hezekiah against the Assyrian Empire, 701 BCE, an attempt to gain independence that ended in military defeat, the people of Judah found themselves in a state of national trauma. Many cities throughout Judah lay in ruins, and the population lived under the constant shadow of fear, anticipating further Assyrian retribution. This climate of defeat and oppression led to widespread fear, despair, and a profound spiritual crisis. The people's faith in God's power was deeply shaken, and many turned back to idol worship. Nowadays, this is also taking place. Rather than allowing hardship to spark spiritual awakening, people flee with all their might toward modern forms of idolatry, seeking false comfort and an illusion of control and power. Through excessive consumption, escapist travel, mindless entertainment, such as festivals, sporting events, and recreational activities, drugs, and other diversions. This pattern of spiritual decline amid impending disaster also occurred in the legendary continent of Atlantis, believed to have existed in the region of today's Greenland and the North Atlantic Islands, some 10,000 to 15,000 years ago. For decades, Atlantean leaders received severe warnings of a coming destruction from a group of women who were prophetesses and priestesses, known as the Amalara. Yet these warnings went unnoticed. In their final years, as many Atlanteans realized their fate was sealed, they chose to bury their heads in the sand and abandon themselves to unrestrained material pleasures, rather than seeking spiritual redemption. But let's return to King Josiah. As he was a ruler deeply devoted to God, he recognized the spiritual crisis facing his people. For this reason, he understood that he must implement a comprehensive religious reform in order to eradicate idol worship. As a king following the path of the light, Josiah naturally sought counsel from the prominent prophets of his time, Zephaniah, Huldah, and Jeremiah. The prophet Zephaniah, the eldest of the three prophets, supported the religious reforms, but warned that without genuine repentance, it would be impossible to escape the coming destruction. Seek the Lord, all you humble of the land who carry out his commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you may be sheltered on the day of the Lord's wrath. Zephaniah 2:3. Zephaniah calls for spiritual action. Seek, search, act before it's too late. He addresses the humble of the land, those who already practice true humility, which isn't the appearance of modesty, but a deep understanding that all human abilities are gifts from God, meant to serve a higher purpose rather than self-glorification. He speaks to those who carry out his commands, the upholders of justice and righteousness, because only those who are humble on a personal level and just in their public dealings stand a chance to save the people. We will explore this point more deeply in the next chapter when discussing the role of the righteous in preventing or mitigating the judgment. The prophetess Huldah was active during Josiah's reign around 622 BCE. The king sent a respected delegation to consult with her about the significance of an Old Testament scroll that the high priest Hilkiah had discovered during the renovation and purification of the temple in Jerusalem. Scholars debate the exact nature of this scroll, but it likely contained the blessings and curses passage found in the book of Deuteronomy, primarily chapters 27 through 28. This passage outlines the divine laws of creation, laws which, when followed, would bring the blessings of prosperity and national well-being, but when violated, would bring the curses of disaster and suffering. Upon hearing its contents, King Josiah tore his clothes in distress as he realized these curses were about to befall his people, due to their persistent deviation from the right path over approximately 400 years. Years during which the prophets had continuously issued warnings and alerts that went unheeded. The passage is divided into two main sections. The blessings in both urban and rural areas, abundant crops and agricultural plenty, economic success, victory over enemies, elevated status among nations, and abundance and health. And the curses: diseases and epidemics, drought and famine, defeat in wars, exile and destruction, suffering and poverty, subjugation to enemies, and dispersion among the nations. The passage concludes with a description of exile and destruction, which according to traditional interpretation were fulfilled in the destruction of both the first and second temples. Are the curses described in this passage not what we are experiencing to some extent in these present days as well? However, we must understand that God does not curse or bless. He does not become angry and punish, nor does he become happy and reward on a personal basis. Rather, the laws of creation, which express his will, operate automatically and therefore will bring sooner or later upon a person and every nation exactly what they have sown. Sow good, reap good; sow evil, reap evil. So, if this is the case, why do we read in the Bible that God punishes and rewards personally? I like to answer this question with a real-life story. When my youngest son was 2 years old, he, like many children his age, used to put his fingers into electrical outlets. Naturally, I would gently scold him, and that was enough to make him stop this habit, because he feared my reaction. In contrast, as he grew older, he stopped doing this. Not because he feared his mom, but because he understood he could get electrocuted. Similarly, we need to understand that the Bible can be read with the consciousness of young children, where we truly fear doing certain actions, because God will punish us if we behave badly, or reward us if we behave well. Or with a mature consciousness, which understands that no man with a white beard is watching us from above. Instead, the laws of creation, which express the Creator's will and have been engraved in creation since the beginning of time and for all eternity, are what automatically and without any possibility of error bring upon us reward and punishment. But let's return to Hulda's response to the delegation sent by the king. Hulda, in her brief and sharp prophetic style, gives the delegation two focused and clear answers. All the curses written in the book will come to pass because of the idol worship that has continued for generations. Because of King Josiah's humility and repentance before God, he will not witness the calamity and destruction that will come upon Jerusalem. Although Hulda prophesied that the judgment against Jerusalem was already sealed, Josiah nevertheless started an extensive religious reform. He purged idol worship from Judah and Israel, destroyed the altars, purified the temple, and centralized the worship in Jerusalem. Maybe he hoped that if he could bring the people to complete repentance, the decree might be cancelled. But his efforts were in vain. The roots of idolatry were so deep, and the reform that was imposed from top to bottom failed to take root among the people. Not only that, but Josiah lacked the charisma of a leader capable of revolutionizing the hearts of the people, a reform that Bilitis, the queen of Sheba, successfully accomplished in the Sheba kingdom during Solomon's reign around 930 BCE, precisely because she had the ability to reach the hearts of her people. Let's look at the response to King Josiah from the last important prophet of that period, the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah began prophesying around 627 BCE and continued to work until after the destruction of the first temple, 586 BCE. He witnessed the destruction of Jerusalem and continued to prophesy in Egypt afterward. He too, of course, supported Josiah's reforms, but warned that they were not enough, as a deep inner change was required. However, the most revolutionary aspect of his prophecy is the description of the cruel Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, as God's servant. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, my servant. Jeremiah 25:9 and 27:6. The title, My Servant, expresses a special relationship of closeness to God, and therefore is a title for those who can be considered God's servants and messengers. This title appears in the Bible in several places and refers only to prophets and those of high spiritual rank, such as Abraham, Jacob, Moses, Joshua ben Nun, King David, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and others. And here, a foreign king, who acts with cruelty against the people of Israel and destroys the temple, receives this honorable title. What is happening here? In fact, my servant means an instrument for carrying out God's plan. Unlike the prophets, who were aware that they were only faithful instruments serving God's will, Nebuchadnezzar was unaware that he was merely a messenger, fulfilling the law of cause and effect. The people of Israel sinned, and ironically, it is precisely Israel's enemy who was chosen to be God's servant to bring punishment upon them. And not only that, but God determined that the Babylonian Empire would rule for 70 years, and any resistance to it is resistance to God's will that would lead to disastrous consequences. Now please remember what we explained in the example about my young son who would push his fingers into the electrical outlet, and the explanation we gave about the difference between the consciousness of a child and the consciousness of an adult. As I mentioned before, according to the mature understanding, God does not personally punish and reward, but actually the clockwork of his perfect system of laws brings to each person exactly what he has sown. There is no randomness in God's perfect creation. It is only the narrowness of our intellect that prevents us from seeing how we have woven the threads of our fate with our own hands, as individuals, as nations, and as humanity as a whole. Therefore, whoever claims that the global chess game is controlled by imperial rulers must also say that the darkness has more power than the light, and that there is a power beyond the Creator's power. This is, of course, an absurd claim, because the truth is that the one who controls all kings is the King of Kings. Or more precisely, the system of the perfect laws of creation of the King of Kings. The rulers of the Matrix may think they are the ones pulling the string of history, but they are actually just servants of the law of cause and effect, because according to the laws of creation, even the plans of the darkness ultimately serve the plans of the light. Now, I want to share with you a true story of one of my students so that you can see how this principle works, not only in major world events, but also in the personal lives of each and every one of us. This woman told me that during her divorce, her ex-husband managed to deprive her of all their shared assets. But she had very strong faith in God and knew that the Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and lift up. 1 Samuel 2:7. She also knew that the laws of creation will deal with whoever chooses to act dishonestly sooner or later. Therefore, unlike what most women would do in this situation, she decided to give up all the money she was entitled to, and instead of wasting her energy in legal battles, she set up a thriving business that within a few years made her wealthier than her ex-husband. One day, she received a letter from the income tax authority informing her that she was due a refund of 8,000 euros, and she was naturally happy to receive this money because it's not every day the tax authority refunds money. But the interesting thing that happened exactly that same week was that her ex-husband called her, which also didn't happen so often, and, with crocodile tears, asked for her help, telling her that someone stole 8,000 euros from him during a business trip. Here is an example of the law of cause and effect in action, where only this woman was aware of its wonders. Her ex-husband was convinced he was a victim. He also always said he didn't believe in the law of karma. Well, it really doesn't matter whether a person believes in the laws or not, because they operate on their own. Meanwhile, the thief who stole the money from her ex-husband and the officials at the tax authority, who returned exactly the same amount to the woman, are completely unaware that they are simply executing what had already been woven in the threads of fate, and was just waiting for someone to implement and fulfill it. Regarding the thief, it's very possible that by his decision, he created problematic karma for himself. But this doesn't contradict the fact that in his action, he served as the executor of the law of cause and effect. If we return to Israel of our present day, surprisingly, it is Hamas who understands this logic, that the laws of creation use empires to impose punishment on a people who have sinned. The Quran mentions God's grant of sovereignty over the Holy Land to the people of Israel. As the chosen people, they ruled it twice and built 2 great temples there. But because of their sins, both were destroyed, the first time by the Babylonians and the second time by the Romans. According to the Quran, God used the Babylonians and Romans to expel the sinful people of Israel from the Holy Land. The verses end with the words, "And if you return, we will return also." Quran, Surah 17, Al-Isra, verse 8. These words serve as a key slogan for Hamas, which interprets them as follows: "If you Jews return to sin, we will also return to punish you." In other words, we will be the ones who, in the current cycle, will serve as the instrument to bring the judgment upon you. Therefore, sophisticated weapons will not help the Jewish people of Israel to win the war. Protests and accusations will not help either. Only living according to moral values grants the right to dwell in the land of ancient Canaan, which means, in ancient Hebrew, to submit to a higher authority. Canaan, the land of those who willingly submit to God's eternal laws. The land will vomit out whoever does not submit to these values, and it really doesn't matter which people will be given the role of the executors of the law of cause and effect.